Good day, all. So, as promised, I'm going to begin my full Doctor Who series overview, or at least the episodes that are still existing. Now, I had been wondering how exactly I was going to do this, if I was just going to talk about them on webcam and, just have me actually up there talking, or even if I was going to do stories that I had looked at recently. And what I decided is, I'm going to do everything from the first episode to the last out of what is available on DVD, which right now is all but 2 stories, and at least those that are completed. There are still a few other animated episodes that will be coming out later this year, and I decided that I'll film these the same way I've been filming my DVD reviews for the past 5 years. So, without further ado, we start way back at the beginning, November 1963, An Unearthly Child. Now, if you've seen the DVD, there was actually 2 different versions shot of Doctor Who's debut episode. Essentially, the first one, which is on the DVD itself, Sidney Newman, largely considered to be the creator of Doctor Who and a fellow Canadian, so I like that. But Sidney Newman had decided that it was not up to his standards, so they refilmed the second version, which is the one that actually went to air the day after JFK, or John F. Kennedy, was assassinated. So the episode ended up airing again a week later because not too many people were really in the mood the day it originally aired to watch a new science fiction series. But when you look at this, and I've always found from the first time I saw it, there's almost something magical about the first episode, especially when the first scene where we see the TARDIS, the opening music begins, and then it actually continues into the first scene. Then you see it pan down to the TARDIS, and the Doctor at this point is a completely mysterious character, and you see the introduction. The first episode of An Unearthly Child, which is called An Unearthly Child, really stands apart in many ways from the 3 episodes that followed in the story. And in many ways, I've almost viewed it as kind of an episode sort of contained on its own with another 3-part episode after it. Because, while I do like the other 3 parts, they're not up to the level of the first one. If you've seen this in the past, it kind of goes into this caveman thing after the beginning, but it's still, I still like it as a full story. It's just parts 2, 3, and 4 are just not to the level of the first episode. But obviously, from my opinion and many other people's opinions, the first episode of Doctor Who was one of the best in the show's history, and obviously sort of sprang what would last for, as of till now, 50 years later. The show is still on in one form, so really making television history. Doctor Who also predates Star Trek by a couple of years, which makes it the longest running science fiction television show in history. But the episode, or the story that really made Doctor Who, was this second one. And this was the original release of these DVDs. If you're wondering, the beginning set, these 3 stories are available, but they come in sort of one combined case that has everything. And this original one from 2006, on the second disc you have the Daleks and the Edge of Destruction. And it was the introduction of the Daleks which really made Doctor Who, and really, even to this day, probably still the most popular Doctor Who monster. They had been sort of invented or created by Terry Nation, who was responsible for some, but not all, of the Dalek stories in the original series. And obviously he has long since passed away, so he hasn't had any involvement in the new series, but his family, who controlled his estate, allowed the new series to, or gave them rights issues, or access to the Dalek franchise, or however that works. Anyway, so you have the Daleks, which was a 7-part story. So this is kind of a 7-episode sort of romp. Now the the Dalek Invasion of Earth, which came out about a year later, is actually in many ways far superior to this one. But really, when you go back to 1963, you look at these kind of pepper pot shaped things with plungers on them. It was something that had never been seen before, and I think that's really where the appeal was, especially using the ring modulator for the voices. Just sort of created an otherworldly thing, and that's what Doctor Who really was back then. Especially if you look at the theme song, use kind of splicing tape note by note to kind of get the whole thing together. So it was there's actually on these DVDs there's actually a sort of a documentary that shows how you had to make synthesizer music when really there weren't any synthesizers. So it's when you look at these, you have to look at them in the context what they were from 1963. And I guess another thing about the Hartnell years, if you've never seen it before, if you're used to some of the later Doctors, like John Pertwee, Tom Baker, these stories, it was a very different era of Doctor Who from what it first came. The stories were very drawn out because it was just, the series was designed to be serialized, go week after week, so they don't go as quickly as some of the later stories do. But I think it, with stories that take a little bit longer, it actually says a lot about narrative. Which we've lost in a lot of modern TV series where it's just sort of, shot after shot and so forth, where these, most of the actors involved in the early Doctor Who series, they were stage actors, and then went into television. So it's, in that way, it was really like looking at a play. And another thing to keep in mind with the early Doctor Who stories is they would rehearse all throughout the week, and then they'd have a 2-hour block on Fridays where they'd shoot the episode. So really it had to be shot in real time. There was very little option for editing tape, so it was just cut to cut, shot to shot. So I think that sort of gives it a little flavor too. So it's kind of like a play thing, and especially with the actors, the adrenaline's going and everything, which now when you have rehearse record, that's not really an issue anymore. So we have the Daleks, the introduction, the Edge of Destruction, which is a 2-part episode. I think the only story that takes place completely in the TARDIS from the original series. And it was mainly they had 2 extra episodes, so they had to come up with something that didn't cost a lot of money. So they came up with this, but it's actually a very eerie sort of tale where the main characters go, kind of loopy and whatnot, and has William Hartnell's sort of longest piece of dialogue, and considering he was known for flubbing lines quite regularly, you get kind of impressed when you see that, and you can almost feel the tension of the crew behind him, hoping that he didn't flub this and they'd have to go back to the beginning, which back then would have been a disaster. But anyway, so that's the Edge of Destruction. Story number 4, Marco Polo, has been lost in its entirety, but the soundtrack still exists. And on this one, there is a reconstruction. So it's a 30-minute condensed version of the Marco Polo story, which was originally 7 episodes. So you can see what it was like, but obviously in cut down form with soundtrack clips. And the last one that I'm going to look at for this one, to keep these videos from going on too long, is The Keys of Marinus, which is actually, so this is story number 5. This is actually one of my personal favorite William Hartnell stories. And what you see with this one is, with a lot of the Hartnell episodes, and this one in particular, the scene from episode to episode, sort of it would almost be like, the situation changes completely from one episode to another, and, they're in a completely different place or whatnot. And this, The Keys of Marinus, kind of illustrates this perfectly, where each episode, or each story within the episode, is almost like a self-contained story within a larger arc, which we did see a lot of with the William Hartnell stories. And I guess then the arc thing has obviously been picked up in the new series. But it was sort of a little different back then. And another thing about a lot of the Hartnell stories is some of the longer stories would actually take place over several days perhaps even several months, so it was a longer time frame to tell a story as well. But anyways, I'm over the 10-minute limit that I've allotted myself for each of these. So as always, everyone, thank you for watching, and have a wonderful day.